Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and today I'm publishing a very special review of Ierusalem, Anno Domini from Devere Games, because I have guests. I have got Jason Perez from Shelf Stories and One Stop Co-op Shop. Hey Jason.
Yo, my peoples, what's up?
And I've got a difficult man to catch on video, Dan Thoreau of Space Biff. How you doing, Dan?
Oh, it's so early.
You've already recorded 2 podcasts, Dan. What do you got? Catch up over here.
I am not a morning person. I went to bed at like 3.
So we're going to let Dan wake up another moment, and I'm going to cut to a little overview of the game. BRB, everyone. All right, so here's a very quick overview of Ierusalem, Anno Domini. This is a game designed by Carmen Jimenez, and it is about getting as close as possible to Jesus at the Last Supper. This is a game for 1 to 4 players. There's special rules for 1 and 2, and I'm going to keep this brief because this description will be appearing on a podcast as well. So I'm going to try to keep this as cross-media as possible. But I have the game set up, and there is a main player board with 5 action spaces. So there is a space where you can send your followers out to various locations on the board. There are locations where you can pick up materials such as fish, bread, and stones. There's also a market where you can get more cards. In the middle of the board, you have the Last Supper setup with a bunch of followers who are surrounding Jesus and trying to get up as close to him as possible. And you also have the apostles who will be called to the Last Supper throughout the game, and you will also score by getting close to them. So if your own supply of followers, and what you're going to be doing throughout the game is bringing stuff to dinner that will get you close to the table, and then placing yourself close to the table so that you score off of your proximity to Jesus and to the apostles. In the solo mode, you're going to play against a little bot named Barabbas, and Barabbas is going to cause the Sanhedrin track to advance, bringing on the end of the game, and also some events that are negative for you and great for your AI opponent. In order to take advantage of any of these spots in the game, you're going to have a deck of cards, and you're going to play those cards one at a time. So essentially, every time you play a card, it'll give you a location where you can go take an action, and you will also have some possible follower actions at the bottom of the card that you can carry out. You're going to want to play cards in certain patterns in order to gain rewards and call the apostles to the Last Supper. And you're also going to want to make sure that you're taking your actions in the most advantageous possible order. Because again, having a lot of resources is great, but the real point is to get your followers out of your player area. So this is a warehouse. I've of course messed everything up in shot, but you have a warehouse that's full of your followers, and they need to go to dinner and sit in the best places possible. You're going to need to get them there by moving them off of your board, putting them in various locations, and then moving them from the locations to dinner, while also collecting the resources that they're going to need to pay up for the best possible seat. In addition, there are offerings that you can collect that take up room in your warehouse that could be spent on resources, but you might want points at the end instead. And you're also going to have a chance to score by collecting parables, which will give you points on their own and are also part of set collection in the game. So despite its religious theme, this game is very much a Euro where you're managing resources, managing storage space, managing a spatial puzzle at the Last Supper table, managing a card order puzzle in terms of calling the apostles, and you're also doing a bit of set collection by listening to some parables. Meanwhile, Barabbas is going to interfere with you, at least in the solo mode of the game. So that is the quickest of quick overviews. Let's go ahead and go to our discussion, because I have Jason Perez and Dan Thoreau on here, and I know that's what you want to hear. All right, we are back with some final thoughts. All right, gentlemen, how do we feel about Ierusalem, Anno Domini? I'm just going to say, I really wish that I'd liked this more than I did.
Well, let's pause there, right? Because the reason why the 3 of us are together, you've convened the panel, right? We're bringing a much different perspective than many reviewers out there. All of us, in some way, have a religious scholarly background.
Yes.
So let's just kind of go down the road and say it. I am a Master of Theological Studies from the University of Notre Dame. That was a previous life. I thought I was going to be a priest. I did not going to be a priest. I'm still a practicing Catholic. And I did teach this stuff for a couple of years. My life is going in a much different direction to psychotherapy now, but I mean, it's still very important in my life to, and I still get very excited when something like this comes along and takes a stab at a religious or like, you know, something in the religious historical realms. Like I think this would lean towards a little bit of more of the historical realm with some faith stuff. So this is exciting to me, and I bring a very a perspective to it. What
Yes.
about you, Dan? You have a background, right?
Yeah, so I grew up Mormon. So that's the religious tradition that I come from, which of course has its own perspective on this time period and Jesus and all of that. I pursued a doctorate in late antiquity and early Christianity. And so I teach at the college level.
You have St. Thomas Aquinas on your website, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I love this stuff. And, you know, when this game came out, I was super excited. And there are some things I really love about it, to be honest. And I want to get into that because I don't want to be a downer. It does some really cool stuff, including theologically and historically, which, you know, I think is super neat that a game like this is able to come out on the market. I understand it was a little bit of a risk
Yes.
for them to publish. And so I think it's cool that they took that leap, and I'm excited that it's out there, but I do have some reservations. You can already read my review, so I won't necessarily go into everything that bugged me, but I would love to discuss it with both of you because of your background. So Liz, tell us about your background.
Yes. So I was raised Lutheran. I became an atheist at 14, and I still am one. However, I took Latin as a way to like answer my confirmation class questions that were never answered. And then I became obsessed. And now I have a PhD in ancient Christianity from Yale because I never do anything by half ever. I'm now a high school Latin teacher from that background. And I'm currently teaching summer New Testament to my little summer school babies. And so we just read about the, you know, who's the greatest, and Jesus let us sit at your right and your left hands. And, you know, we've just done it. So I think that my sentiments are going to be similar to y'all's, but like, of course, with differences that are key to us, which is that I'm so glad that somebody took this theme on. I'm so glad that this game is something that was considered marketable and that exists, because I think that's great. But I also, just as a historian of this period, as somebody who's interested in theology, wish that some things had been different.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the easiest part is to take on the mechanical stuff. And Dan, your review, like your take on the mechanical stuff was like euro. So it shouldn't take us long, right, to discuss the actual Euro stuff. So like as Liz went over in her overview, I think the thing to understand about this game is that there's a core flow, right? You start it with your followers and your cards in your hand. You play one card a turn, and that one card enables you to move your follower to somewhere, usually the lands, right? So your follower is going to go from your board to the land, and then your follower is going to go with another action. You get to take your follower from the land, gathering offerings, to the Last Supper.
Yeah.
So it's this triangle movement that you are trying to coordinate, and there's a bunch of followers that you have to coordinate, and one of the victory conditions, like get all your followers out there. And so I felt like, just on a purely mechanical level, my sensibility when it comes to Euros isn't as kind of high. Like a Vital Lacerda might be a little bit much for me and my group. So I appreciated that the core flow was easy to understand and easy to execute, and had some interesting decisions in there. So just as a baseline Euro experience, I liked what it was doing. What do you think, Dan?
You know, what I liked about it especially is the way that you plan these cards, and you're taking all these considerations. I love it when every action that you take, you're thinking not about what is it doing right now, you're thinking about what is it doing now, what is it doing in the medium term, what is it doing in the long term. And the cards do a great job of that. Because you're playing the cards, and you're moving out your piece in order to, you know, get fish or whatever it is that you need to do. But you're also putting out these cards to gather the symbols on the cards in order to do what the game calls visit an apostle, where you're getting the apostle to come out and go hang out with Jesus at the Last Supper.
Hey Thomas, the Last Supper's happening. What are you doing over there? Let's go.
Yeah, let's get over to the Last Supper together. And depending on the apostle, he's going to trigger some sort of bonus. Maybe Thomas is going to be like, hey, you can come to the Last Supper with me.
Yeah.
Maybe you hang out with Judas, and he's like, hey, I just had a windfall of money, So have some of this money.
Blood money. Here
The
you
fact
go.
that the Judas piece is silver really did delight me, like all the way down to my soul. I'm just gonna say.
Yeah, it was really and it uses some of that symbolism that's kind of that is quite lovely. And so I liked the mechanics on the whole, even if I found them a little bit dry. I'm willing to make an allowance, especially because the Euro game is so dominant in the way that we think about board games, the way that many board games are produced. So even though I didn't love the mechanics, I think they're very functional. And I think they did a good job of getting everybody to the table and letting you play without too much overhead. So that was a good part. Liz, how did the process of gameplay strike you?
I mean, okay, it wasn't my favorite. I like my Euros very heavy these days. So, it didn't like thrill me, but it wasn't bad. Like, this is a very playable Euro. If somebody said, hey, it's game night, do you want to play this? I would be like, yeah, absolutely, let's play it. Like, I kind of like the puzzly aspect of placing the friendly followers like in different configurations around the table. I enjoyed, again, like you said, like the emphasis on forward thinking, that it's not just, oh, I want some fish. It's, oh, I need to play this. I need to go here. I need to get these fish. And I need to use them to do this. And I also need to keep track of my warehouse to make sure that I'm getting enough people out of it to make room for the stuff that's going to go in it. Maybe I want this Mahane card. There's a lot to think about. And so even though you're only playing one card, ostensibly, it's very simple, you do get to do a lot. And I personally value that in games. I love ease of taking your turn, complexity of decisions, like which turn to take, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this game does that very well.
Yeah. And so I think mechanically it is from, it's good to really good, depending on how you personally, have experience of Euros and, where you're at with that.
So then, and Dan also pointed this out in his with Peace, and I think so mechanically, solid, doesn't blow the doors off, functional, whatever. Where the game starts to kind of buckle a little bit. So I mentioned that flow, right? You go from the personal space to the lands, to gather resources, and then you get to the Last Supper, and that Last Supper space. That's the key, right? It's it draws all the attention. That's where the Jesus figure is. I forgot to take that Jesus figure, and like that's where you're putting your pieces. And so it's doing a lot of work mechanically, and it's doing a lot of work thematically there.
Yes.
And so, and maybe this might be a thematic thing, but it's also a mechanical insight too, in terms of like it's very lockstep. Like you go there, you make your offering, and that's it. Generally you're there, and there's like one apostle that lets you kind of move things around. It's like a 1-for-1 trade that felt very stately. It felt very like, the Jesus, the kind of Jesus that emerges in this game is like the kind of the royal Jesus, which isn't the Jesus that I associate with this period, like the Last Supper.
So I've just taught my students about the messianic secret, right? Like talking about the disciples managing to make it through the entire Gospel of Mark and have no freaking clue who Jesus really is, even after they figure out that he's the Messiah at the Transfiguration. And then the first person to really get it is a Roman centurion who just watched him die. Like, it's amazing as a storyline. So I'm just going to lay it out. The reason this game drove me crazy is because the concept is so good, because it's so real to the New Testament and it's so human. I want to be closer to Jesus. I want to be the best disciple. Lord, Lord, which of us is the greatest? Lord, Lord, can I sit at your right hand? Can I sit at your left hand? I will take on the cup that you're going to drink from. Like, these people don't know what they're promising, and they so earnestly want to be something special in Jesus's eyes, even before they fully get who he is, even before they really understand the consequences of that, right? There's something about that that's so touching, I think, in the New Testament, especially like when the other disciples get mad after James and John like ask to be the favorite, because they also want to, like, there's something so human about it. And I feel like this game misses the point, because the point is that you're not actually supposed to ask that. You're supposed to have the insight that the first will be last, and that the one who will be the greatest will be the servant of all. And like that entire spiritual point that Jesus kind of makes to his disciples, who are silly in their depictions of not getting it right. It's almost like the game enshrines the wrong part, where you're supposed to just keep blundering towards a material excellence, when
Yeah, I
that's
mean, it's
not
about the
the
offering.
point.
It's about the quality of your offering. Like if you bring rocks, you're in the corner, and if you bring fish, you're close to the middle. And it's like that. That's
Yeah,
not
but if you give all that you have, you could be the widow with the one coin. I'm just
right.
saying this
Right. Yeah.
game.
No. Yeah. You're
Yeah.
right. You're right. And like so, and I felt very regal, very stately, because like that's
Yeah.
what it would be like a royal court, right, or like a medieval court. Now, Daniel, you tell me more. So like the better your offering, the closer you are to the site, right?
Yeah.
The reason why you're there. And from what I know about the time period, from what I know about just, like gatherings in the Middle East and everything, like it wasn't like stately. Like it was a knife fight to get in there, and it's like whoever has the sharpest elbows and whoever can kind of muscle in there and get the favor and all that kind of stuff. And I almost wanted the middle to work out more like a Catan vibe or something where it's like I'm trading, it's more dynamic.
Yeah.
I'm bringing my 3 fish. You're sitting over there. Okay, I'm going to give you my 3 fish. I'm going to give you the seat, and then we have to make kind of trades that way. And it just felt so like there's this resource flow, and I'm going along with the flow, and then the resource flow kind of gets into that middle area, and it's like, oh, whoa, this is falling a little flat for me. I don't know what you thought, Dan.
I agree with you completely. So I'm sitting here with Jesus
There,
and
he's sitting with Jesus. Look at him.
and as you can see, I'm very close to Jesus, which means I have 7 points.
Yes.
And on the screen, Liz has, she's next closest to me. I don't know how your Zoom header panned out, but that means Liz has 6 points. And Jason, you're way out in the boonies.
I'm way out there. My rocks are just not going to do it.
Your rocks didn't do it, so you got 5 points. And the game does this weird thing where, first of all, it's pokey. Okay, like did anyone else's lands like always fill up and no one else could get in there? Like it bottlenecks really easily, so the game becomes slow, which I think is a bit of a turnoff, because here I am, I'm like, okay, this game is accessible for newcomers, and then I have newcomers come and we're playing like this 2.5-hour game that's not heavy, so it doesn't have that appeal to keep our attention, but then also it's slow. And in the midst of that happening, suddenly we have this weird headspace where, okay, well, I've put down Judas, and sitting next to Judas is like -5 points. Someone else is sitting next to Jesus, which is +7 points. I play a thing that lets us switch places, which is a net of 12 points. And guess what? I am now thinking about, in the most Euro of terms, like all of these traded sums of points, which I don't know if this is the game's fault. I kind of think it isn't. I think the Euro model might be at odds.
Right. Yes, correct.
With it's inherently just so transactional and so mathematical. Yes. And what I look for, these days, if you ask me my religious beliefs, that's going to be I'm gonna dump trauma on you, right? But the things that I love about this, the reason that I went to school for it, the reason I teach it, is all because of this component of the human struggling to reach out and graze fingers with the divine. And this game is just not that. And I want it to be so badly. I don't want to be sitting there and quibbling over sums. The idea of going out and gathering fish to take to the feast is great. But the idea that Jesus has people at the door like, no, you don't get to sit next to Jesus until you bring the 2 fish and the 2 loaves. I just find it so at odds. And we've seen a few games that have done a wonderful job of treating religious belief recently, that I feel like this kind of ends up being anti-belief. I play this, and even though, like I said, I've got a lot of religious stuff I'm working through all the time, I can still read the Gospels and I love it.
Yes. As an atheist, yes.
Yeah. And these stories, even though I look at it and I see historical Jesus rather than, the hypostatic Jesus, I still look at it and I love what it's trying to do. I love the different Jesuses. I love them all in their own way. And this game, instead of showing me, the messianic secret, or Jesus the King, or Jesus the weird alien from John, all of those Jesuses are so cool. And then I play this Jesus and I get Euro Jesus, and it's just just so
Jesus.
And it's so inimical to what I want.
But I mean, what I will say is that I wouldn't necessarily say it's like Euros. I think it's like the more modern, crunchy multiplayer solitaire Euro. You know, I think there is a older breed of Euro, and having worked with Puerto Rico, having worked with some other like kind of the older designs, it's much more interactive, much more above the table, and that's I think what I want. I wanted a more above the table experience, and they give you that in the multiplayer, the 3 and 4 player with like the favor tokens. But I think I agree with you, Dan. I think I use those things 2 or 3 times a game. That felt very kind of tacked on.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a lot of reason to interact. Like I'm fighting myself. And I'm not fighting myself in that interesting religious way of like, okay, I'm fighting my sin. No, I'm fighting my warehouse capacity. And nowhere in the Gospels is there warehouse capacity ever.
Yeah. I also do want to point out that this, like, again, like most of my issues with this game were thematic. Like game, if it had been another theme somehow, I don't know how, but I might have felt better about it. But thematically, like as you mentioned, like, so it's not just the resources in the warehouse. It's stuff like parables as a resource that made me like a little parable card. It kind of made me crazy. Like, oh, you can go listen to a parable right here before Last Supper. I thought Barabbas as the solo AI, but like in cahoots with the Sanhedrin was very weird. Right. There was just a lot that I struggled with. And I think it might be an issue of being too close to the subject matter in a way. Like, because I've spent so much time poring over the New Testament in so much detail, those kinds of connections drawn made me nuts, because I just don't really think that Sanhedrin and Barabbas were going to be pals. Like,
well, I think the idea that like the Barabbas is politicking to be at the that's what the rule book actually says. Like the Barabbas he isn't just like this guy that's like shows up. Like he wants to be, he thinks he knows the way the politics are gonna go. He thinks because one person is always released, that's kind of a tradition. So it's like, I want a politics to send him to be that one. I don't want Jesus to be the one.
Which historically I just want to point out that is a unique thing to the Gospels, from what I can tell. But yes, according to the Gospel story, yes, this is an annual thing.
So, I mean, I guess like mechanically that the player experience, irrespective of the religious theme, mechanically, my biggest issue was the center, and the center just felt like it felt very Euro-y. It felt very like, okay, I'm gathering the resources, and like I like to have a little bit more of a feeling of a climax, like because that's what an engine builder gives you. An engine builder gives you that pop at the end of like, okay, I do boom. And the pop here is I get to add 5 points instead of 6 or whatever. Like, I progressed myself on the arithmetic, and that it landed with a little bit of a thud, at least in the middle.
Yeah.
And then you add beyond that, the thematic stuff of, I kind of wanted the middle to be more thematically resonant too. So that's kind of where I'm at wise.
One of the things that really stood out to me is how often in the process of play, people at the table. So I'm sitting there and my players are having very different reactions, because I'm sitting going, wow, this is kind of supersessionist. Like,
please continue with that one. Yeah.
Because we've got supersessionist for the peoples.
Okay. So supersessionism is this idea that the Hebrew Bible and all of this Jewish religion exists solely to point to Jesus and the Christian religion. The idea that it's the Old Testament exists to create the New Testament. And in Christianity, this is something we struggle a lot with. And it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, because I teach this sort of stuff. So when students come in, we like to point out, when Jesus is reading when he's quoting these sections from the Hebrew Bible, if you're not being generous, he's misquoting them in many cases. And if you are being generous, he's reinterpreting them. And this is pretty common. Almost every time Jesus brings up something from the Hebrew Bible, you can look at it in an original context and be like, oh, he's kind of changing the meaning here. Very common. You might have, as both of you certainly know, Christians consider like the book of Isaiah to be the 5th gospel. And the book of Isaiah is not talking about Jesus in its original context. It just isn't. And you really have to stretch it to get it there. Now, I'm not saying that to smash anyone's beliefs or anything like that. I'm saying that because this game leans into that, because rather than, for instance, the only time Jewish people really make themselves known is the Sanhedrin. Playing this game, as far as I can tell, historically, you would be a Jewish community, right, out in the desert.
Yes.
And they don't have any identity. You're not an Essene, you're not a zealot, you're not, you're not some Hasmonean restorationist, you're not one of the 5 or 6 major sects that would be here.
Yeah.
You're just sort of this featureless thing, which can give the impression that you're basically just a proto-Christian. The Romans are absent, so there's no, to speak and use a modern term, there's no secular investment in the crucifixion of Jesus. There's no political reason to crucify him. There's purely a religious, self-motivated reason, and the people who hold that reason are Jewish.
Yes.
Which unfortunately I think can lean into something a little bit frightening, especially right now when we're seeing this resurgence of Christian nationalism, that personally I think every Christian should be invested in pushing back on.
Yes. I mean, I'm literally teaching New Testament right now, and I had to have an uncomfortable conversation with a student who just asked, and the thing is, you can't judge them for asking. The kid said, why were the Pharisees so against God's will? What? Like, and, of course, I'm like, whoa, several steps back. Like, we had to have the conversation about, actually, Paul never stops identifying as a Pharisee. Jesus's teachings were closest to Pharisee teachings of any other Jewish sect at the time. And, Jesus doesn't stop being Jewish. Like, we really explicitly hit that multiple times in class, but getting that presupposition out of our cultural understanding of what's happening in the New Testament is so hard that even after having explicit discussions with students about it, they still fall into the old tracks. They cannot help it because of the way that our society is built. You have to break it down. And so, I do think that seeing the Sanhedrin, especially this way, it does, you're right, like imply that Jesus's only enemies are Jewish enemies. While Jesus's Judaism, like Jesus appears as very much like an icon, like a Christian icon looking thing in this game, instead of as a Jewish dude from Galilee who's like living a Galilee life. And it's uncomfortable.
I read the designer diary, and I think there were a couple of designer diaries, and I think the person is coming at it from a devotional context. Like, this is a devotion for them.
Yeah.
And that, when we come from that perspective, like there's the Bible. And I'm going to kind of enter into the Bible, and then whatever my presuppositions are, and that's kind of what's going to be expressed. And there's a whole bunch of Christians that feel that way. And, we're all historical people, and we all see the context, and we all see that there were motivations behind why the Gospels emphasize the role of the Jews and de-emphasize the role of the Romans. They wanted to stay alive. They didn't want to write anti-Roman propaganda. So it's like, okay, let's soft pedal. Let's make Pilate look like a really great guy, or really front, but there was no historical evidence that he was any such thing. To the point.
Also, no evidence that his wife was like an astrology girl who like had dreams that.
Right. So there was all these motivations why the Gospels are written the way they were written. But if you are coming at it from that kind of like devotional, this is a very heartfelt game for the designer. Like, I mean, they really wanted to express something about their own spirituality with this game. And there is a very valid way of worshiping Jesus that's so directly like, okay, we're going to connect over here. And it's almost like she wants to be in the Last Supper, right? And like, this is what I would have done. I would have scoured for, offerings and tried to get as close to Jesus as possible. So like, it's a valid way to approach it, but planting it into this context of, let's just call it, we haven't said the word yet, anti-Semitism. Like supersessionism is anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And seeing that, the followers of Jesus were proto-Christians is anti-Semitic. And we are not accusing anybody of anything, but like in terms of participating in tropes unknowingly, this game might kind of brush up against that a little bit too close for comfort, especially for us who have this mindset of the historical background.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful you said it that way, Jason, because I am certainly not accusing the designer of being anti-Semitic. But one of the things when I teach a class on the New Testament or on the letters of Paul is we are just so careful. One of the first things we look at is the way the Pharisees become the good guys of Acts, right? They're the bad guys of the Gospels in many cases, but then you move into Acts and suddenly they're the good guys. They're the ones pushing the church forward, this early Christian movement. And the reason we do that is not to say Pharisees good or Pharisees bad. We do that to say history complicated. And that
writer is complicated for perspective shifting.
One that we're looking at different perspectives written by different people, and that we're looking at a large organization, all that sort of thing, that we want to complicate. We want to add some turbulence to those waters. And what I was saying is that I'm sitting at this table and I'm going, there's a disconnect, because I, as a historical guy who teach college, I'm sitting there and going, wow, this is kind of supersessionist. And everyone else at the table is saying things that I think are insightful in a different way that I can't reach, because I'm too close, just like Liz said. And what I mean is, for instance, when you upgrade that little tile by, I think you give enough favors, and you take it off and you're like, oh, I finally get more storage space, and you get one more space on your storage. And every time we've done that, everyone at the table has like burst out laughing, because it is just so piddly to get like one more. And so they're going, well, this is ridiculous.
I've listened to 2 parables. I've sat at the feet of my Lord for hear him says, dispense wisdom, you get an extra ability to catch and fish. Great.
Yeah. And the same goes with the parables. We were playing with a friend of ours named Caroline, and she had this absolutely wonderful point where when we finally earned the first parable in our game, she was going, oh, well, what do we do? Do we tell the parable? She was thinking the game would now suddenly break the fourth wall and become devotional. Like what are we doing? Or does the parable let you move closer to Jesus because you're understanding him better? Like, do you slide to the front of a row? But instead of being intermeshed in kind of these interesting ways or playing with what the game could be, it just slips right back into Euro multi-solitaire Euroland, where it's like, well, you get some points. And it's just such a disappointment to have that happen. And I really appreciate having played with people who didn't get a higher degree in Christianity, because they were pointing these things out to me that are very insightful as we play, approaching this as Christians, approaching this as people who are yearning for a devotional game because it presents itself that way.
Right.
And not getting it.
Or getting a version that is very locked into a certain kind of devotion to Jesus, which is very valid, but that from a historical person's perspective, because it has some difficulties. I would say it that way.
Yeah.
And I wanted the knife fight. I want a knife fight in the Last Supper, personally.
So I actually feel like this is a good spot to kind of ease towards the end of this, which is just a quick discussion of maybe what this game could have been and what we would have liked to see. Like, I think that what you're saying about elbows is right. I would have liked to see more human foibles come to the fore, and like the foolishness of trying to get closer to Jesus, who, by his own declarations, values the least of these little ones and the prostitutes and the tax collectors and like the little kids. Like, Jesus gave, even though I'm an atheist and I don't think about this in a devotional context, right? If you really are reading the Gospels, it's very clear that Jesus's generosity with himself and with his time is very much at the forefront. And he gives that self and that time to people who you wouldn't think deserved it or who had earned it in any way at all, other than to think that he was something special. And maybe not even that, because some people hadn't.
I'm going to answer your question, say more elbows. I have to drop because I have something going on upstairs. But please, you two continue. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. So thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. But Dan, do you have any thoughts on that?
I just to say that I agree. The best part of the game, and I really do like this part of the game, is that central, here's Jesus, here's the upper room, let's go try to sit close to him. I think as a scoring mechanism and as a shared incentive space, to use a mechanical term, I like that. I wish more of the game had fed into it. I love Jason's idea about throwing elbows. I like your idea too. How cool would it be if you're playing this game and then Jesus doesn't show up because he's out helping somebody? And in a way, that's kind of a life lesson, right? You're like, oh, here we are. We're gonna bribe the door, bouncer to get a really good spot. And then Jesus comes in at the last minute and he pushes an apostle out of the corner, and he sits at the corner of the table and he's like, sorry, I was healing a leper,
Yeah.
I don't want, as a critic, I try to avoid talking about the game that I didn't play.
Yes.
But I just see so much potential in this game, and there are glimmers of it.
Yes.
I think that the designer, I see glimmers of her intentions that I really like. I like the energy of the game. I even like the way that it's sort of human in that it emphasizes like you're out there picking stones and catching fish. You know, you as the player are so preoccupied with the mundane that in a way you miss the divine in front of you.
Yes.
And I like that. In a way, I wish it had leaned into that, because the irony of the game is that you pursue the mundane straight into the divine.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts, Liz?
No, I see. The thing is that is such a beautiful interpretive point if I felt the game was doing it deliberately.
Yeah. And that's what I mean.
That's, yeah.
Yeah. In that the mundane shouldn't, you know, being distracted by the stones and the fish and the coins shouldn't lead you to Jesus, right? That's the distraction. That's mammon.
Right.
And instead it leads you straight to Jesus. So sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's kind of exactly where it goes with me. It's almost like we're still not getting the messianic secret. Like, it's a very Markian game in the sense that we are in the roles of disciples who are just slouching blindly, towards the table, and we don't really know what we're doing or why we're doing it. We just know that we really want to do it, that we really want to get close, and we're like rating each other on our closeness, and in the end miss the point. Like, maybe, in a funny way, right? Like, it's the game puts us on rails to mimic all of the people of the New Testament who also miss the point. And like, there is a profundity in that. Like,
and I do think she's doing that a little bit deliberately, in that, like, it's so hard to read it into intent, but I do think that she is positioning the mundane as us being distracted. I really do. I just think that the way it connects to the end of the game is just like, I think it would have been cool if, like, at the end of the game, it was like, flip a card, psych, oh, whoever had the lowest score won, or
something that's a surprise. Jesus is all about surprises. Like, that's actually something I very much deliberately teach my students. Like, my least favorite thing about youth group as a kid was when people tried to tell me the Bible was basic instructions before leaving Earth. Like, none of this is basic. The entire point of the kingdom on Earth, right, is that things that you don't expect happen. The son who goes and spends his inheritance gets a big welcome back, and the older brother has to look on angrily even though he did everything right. The people who start halfway through the day get the same wages as the people who started in the morning. Like, I wanted to see a little bit more of that topsy-turvy world emerge at the end of the game. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, I do. I one of the reasons that, speaking as somebody who was raised with a very particular version of Jesus, a Jesus who came to America, right? And but one of the reasons I love the Gospels is because Jesus is just so dynamic. He's such a surprise, even in this game. So this is kind of Jesus as king, right? Jesus as ruler. Here he's got his nimbus. He's huge. He's like the size of 8 people. We have this royal Jesus. And he kind of is the king I expect, right? He's the whole idea with Matthew is, Jesus as king, but then you don't get the king you expected. You don't get the conquering hero. You don't get the restoration of the house of David. You get a God who will feed you in a different way. And, is that a retrojection of people trying to explain why their Messiah was killed? Sure. But let's set aside that stuff. And let's just look at what the text is trying to teach us, that this is an unexpected God. This is not a God who ripped himself off the cross and wiped out his enemies. This is God who died. Yeah. And this game just kind of presents Jesus as king in a very king way.
Yeah. And that's also sad because this is supposed to be God who's about to die. Yeah. And knows it. And, Gethsemane hasn't happened yet in this game. And so kingly Jesus is even more of a weird note here for me, because this should be a Jesus who's feeling insecure because he knows one of his friends is about to sell him out. And a Jesus who's about to go meekly to his fate, but also beg for a reprieve because he's human enough to want to not go up on that cross and do this. Like, I don't know. There's an insecurity in that Jesus that I personally find very affecting.
Right.
And it's not in this game. And like, of course, it's a game. It's a Euro game. Like, there's only so much it can do. I don't want to place expectations on it, right? That it just really could never have fulfilled. But at the same time, like, I feel like it presenting itself in this way raises these questions, right? And brings this discussion out in a really natural way. And like, maybe that's the perk of the game in a way, like the fact that it sparked this conversation and probably similar ones. Like,
Well,
what
and
is it to us?
yeah, sorry, and to agree with you completely, the version of this game I want would be so heretical. Yeah, like I picture a version of this game because I find it super weird that that Judas is bad, right?
Yeah.
So Judas is negative points always. He always gives you money, and I find that kind of weird. That
Yes.
that you basically use Judas as a bartering chip, to put in front of people, make them lose points. And I think it would have been fascinating, for example, if you didn't know who the traitor was, who would betray Jesus. No, of course Jesus knows, but Jesus says someone's going to betray me, and you're going, oh, who among these is going to betray Jesus? And maybe it's a surprise. Maybe the game lets you, through studying the parables, deduce the various scoring quantities of the apostles.
Ooh.
That, like, understanding it gives you great sight. Like, you don't know, these apostles have hidden scoring amounts, and it's only by learning what Jesus is teaching that you see into people's souls, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, then the game might have the possibility that, oh, maybe Peter's the traitor, and then everyone's mad. And so I totally acknowledge that the version of the game I want might be impossible.
Yeah.
But I want it to do something like that. I want the parables to mean something more than points. I want the favors we're doing each other to be acts of charity that do something beyond just unlocking cargo space.
Yes.
I want it to reach out and touch me, and it kind of didn't.
Yes, I like your personal Jesus there. But I think that this game, like all media of any kind about the divine, especially I think about Jesus, right? I mean, in some ways, I think there's a profundity in the fact that it will never be enough.
Mm-hmm.
That we're always going to want more. Like, there's a reason that people wrote infancy gospels and apocryphal Acts of the Apostles. We want more. What was Jesus like as a kid? What was Jesus like as a person? How do we get closer? We want to get close. We want to be the people in Mark who are on the boat and not the ones who are on the shore when Jesus is preaching away from the masses. And like that desire for closeness, and the fact that we will never get it as literary analysts or as people of faith, if that's what you are. Like, I mean, I think that the game accidentally winds up being something profound in that way, regardless of its intentions, because of that mystery at the heart of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So do I have quibbles with the way this game went about things? Yes. But I think I come down and I'm glad it exists. I'm glad that it's trying, because the other thing is that, like, frankly, nobody tries this. So how is it going to be a perfect first try?
Yeah. And you know what, to your point, I hope that the designer, Carmen Garcia Jimenez, I hope she tries again. I know that she has, so on her profile, she mentioned something about she wants to create devotional games. She wants to spread the word of Jesus. I don't remember how she puts it, but I hope she does. I hope she continues to take her personal devotion and try to, and I recognize it's scary, in part because of what we're doing right now, right?
Right.
But I hope she keeps giving it. I hope she keeps sharing herself, not just because she's religious. I hope that many people are trying to share their vision of history or personal interest or whatever it is. And I hope she continues to share her devotion, because I think, especially once she steps away from Jesus directly,
yes,
I think a lot of the problems sort of dissolve. Jesus is so big.
Let's say there's a reason that my doctorate is in the ancient Christianity program and not the New Testament program, which is the other one I thought about applying for. So
it's too big.
The smaller subset of text is actually the part that's too big. But so with that said, yeah, I think that we come down to the same side. I think Jason, although he had to go and handle the kids because he's a good person and a good parent, I am neither. So I think I think we would all agree. We want more games like this in the world, because it's not that the game is perfect, and we certainly could quibble with it all day if we wanted to, but it's what it's trying to do that I think is meaningful, especially in a world of games that aren't always trying to do something, but you and I are the types of people who are always looking for the one that is.
Yeah. I agree. I'm grateful that it's here, and it's such a sea change that this game is marketable. I think
Yeah.
to like the new atheist movement of the early 2000s, and just kind of being like, oh, it's fun to slam religion, and I'm glad we've reached a point where we can acknowledge that, it's okay for somebody to have these devotional thoughts and want to express them without unnecessarily slamming them, because
Yeah.
I do want this. Despite having a lot of reservations, and I've shared them, and I'm sure you're sick of my reservations, but I am grateful I played this game.
Yes, I'm also grateful.
Yeah, I'm glad to have played it.
Yes. And you know what? I think that in a world full of games where I can't say that, that's saying something.
Yeah.
So I think that we'll cut it off here, but I hope we do this again. Like, I hope there are more devotional games for us to get together and talk about, frankly.
Yeah.
But for now, everybody out there, this is going to be on the Beyond Solitaire channel. If you're watching us, it's also going to be a podcast on One Stop Co-op Shop. So Jason will run it over there. But Jason can be found at One Stop Co-op Shop or at Shelf Stories. I'm Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire. And then Dan, where can you be found?
Spacebiff.com.
Spacebiff.com. Place of the finest written board game reviews in the business.
Oh, Liz.
And so thank you so much, everybody who joined us on this conversation. You're free to continue it in the comments, so please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.